Hi everyone, welcome to Let's Talk D&D 3.5. So today I was going to talk somewhat about running modules as a campaign and kind of how to keep it all together. So the example I was planning on using is the Sunless Citadel adventure path. The 8 modules were published individually over time in kind of the early 3rd edition's lifespan. It was before 3.5 came out. Although it's an easy update to get them going for 3.5. However, this was before all the modern adventure paths, before the Dragon Magazine adventure paths and everything, so there are some light connections between the modules, or at least between some of the modules, but it's a good example as a level 1 to level 20 campaign through modules because you need to make it your own to make it really work, because the individual modules each have their own plot, but it's a very, very weak tie that gives the players an overall plot. So there are ways to do it. There are some things to keep in mind while you're doing that, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. So, the first thing to keep in mind is to engage the players throughout, and part of doing that is to make links between the modules. You don't want to have any point in the campaign where everything just dies off and no one knows what to do. So with the Sunless Citadel adventure path, the modules, just a brief overview of the individual modules. The Sunless Citadel is the beginning module. It has to do with the namesake, a fortress that has basically been destroyed and taken over by whatever inhabitants happen to come into it. In this case, some kobolds and some goblins and an evil druid. And there's things going down, and it's all about this one little fortress that's near a small town. And one thing that I would like in a longer term campaign is one location that the party can always come back to. I think it's easier to engage the characters throughout the campaign if there are long-term NPCs and locations that they feel connected to. And a weak point in the Sunless Citadel campaign is that doesn't really exist. And the starting location doesn't make a great place for that hub. However, I think that works out nicely because it can be good to start out somewhere small, move on to somewhere big. Then you can get a feeling for the size change, get a feeling for how the NPC interactions are different, and then make it your own. So what I like to do is, after moving away from the first region in Sunless Citadel and going on to the Forge of Fury, which is purely a site-based dungeon crawl with very, very weak town notes. I mean, there's really not a whole lot going on there. But what I like to do is combine the Forge of Fury, which is a great dungeon crawl, with the next one, Speaker in Dreams, which is more of a town-based location. So I like to combine the two towns, and the names, I believe, are Blasingdale and Brindenford in order. And I like to combine the two of them so that you can be based out of there for a longer period of time. Additionally, it sets up a great location for later on when you do some traveling, and no matter what, like the modules have you leaving the area, but it doesn't really give you another town. Like there's no other base in the Sunless Citadel that would work quite as well as if you were to have a solid location devised around the time of the second and third module. Because in the fourth module, it's a wow, I don't know how to describe that offhand real quick, but Standing Stones is kind of a mystery module, and it's all about the DM, tricking the players, so to speak. That's like the best way I can do it in short. And it's a really, really fun module. But as a long-term location, it's not a good one. It's a druid enclave, basically, and it's been ruined. And not that the players know that yet, but like everything that happens and everything they find out about it is just gonna make them not want to stay there. There's really not you never know what your players are gonna do, man. You never know. So I would say most of the time that's not really gonna be an ideal location for a hub. And then going on from there, so that's 4. That's half the campaign down in just brief strokes. The Heart of Nightfang Spire. I think that sounds right. I always say that one wrong, but yeah, it's a pretty good one. It's another dungeon crawl though, and again, there's really no town connections there, so it's great having the hub set up. But it's probably the strongest overarching plot piece that you can work with, because it harkens back to the Sunless Citadel, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of undead, which isn't really there's really no preview for that previously, and that's part of what I was saying about how all the modules in the adventure path are independent of one another. They were published months apart. It wasn't really a plan to make it a full campaign. It's just that the new edition was out, they were making modules for it, they wanted the levels to go up as the modules were printed, so there's something for everyone. And then they kind of worked it together a little bit after that. So a villain kind of makes a return with loose ties in it in the Heart of Nightfang Spire, and kind of gives a mention for an overarching villain, and sets up ties. Basically, it sets up ties for later on. But then the biggest problem I have with the adventure path is the next module, Deep Horizon, which pretty much doesn't have any ties to anything and just feels off. It's the most likely module for me to replace, but it is an interesting standalone module. It's all about the drow and what's the name of those bat people? They're in the Monster Manual 2. The name is escaping me. The Desmodu. There we go. So yeah, it's the drow versus the Desmodu, and they just have nothing to do with anything you've previously done. It's in the Underdark, so it's just a little strange. But as an independent module, it's fine. I don't have anything against it. It's just that you need to do a lot of work with it, which I'm gonna get into after I am done with the overview. But the next one is Lord of the Iron Fortress, which has a planar component to it. Again, I think that with the proper setup, you could have some nice ties to it. But alone, it's a little weak with the connections. They're there, but it's a little weak. But it is pretty interesting. It's a very good choice for a planar setting. It gives the PCs a change of pace. You're going to be leaving your long-term hub here no matter what, because it's planar travel. I mean, that's what always happens. Once you leave your plane, your city's gone, so there's that. And then the final one, which I'm pretty sure is the shortest module, Bastion of Broken Souls. It's definitely the final challenge. I think it does live up to a campaign-ending module. It does a good job there. You finally get to see the final villain that has been slowly introduced. The only problem that I really have with it is, man, if you're not a high optimization party, yeah, the DM kind of has to weaken things a bit, because there are some nasty encounters in there. It's like there's one assassination attempt that starts off the module, and it can wipe you. like that could be a party wipe. And then of course the final villain could be a party wipe pretty easily. But at that point, I mean, that's the final villain. You want it to be memorable, and it totally is memorable. It's just that that's one of those things as a DM that you have to know your party and think about tweaking before you do it. And since it's the final encounter, I feel like the DM's responsibility is to spend more time on that. But now, I mean, I could go on about that for a long time, but to go backwards a bit here and just mention all the ties, making a campaign out of all of that. I know I just really give a tiny little snippet on each of those, but some things that you can do are foreshadowing, lots of foreshadowing. That's what you really want to do. So in the Sunless Citadel, something you could do to lead into the Forge of Fury, since the Forge of Fury is a site-based dungeon crawl, and it's called the Forge. It's all about that dwarven forge. You can have armors, weapons with the mark of the blacksmith Durgeddon found scattered throughout the Sunless Citadel, or as little or as many as you want. They could be broken, they could be intact. You could have an NPC tell the party more about that when they bring it back to the starting town, or tell the party that there's somebody in the next town, Blasingdale, that would be interested in purchasing it. That's one thing. That's one of the potential plot hooks that the module gives you. And I think it's decent. I don't think it's going to appeal to every party. No adventure hook is going to appeal to every party, but it's one that could work. I know that I haven't run the entire module. I've read through it. I've made a whole lot of session notes. I've read through other people's journals about it, so I kind of have an idea of exactly what I would do with my group. And I would offer them that if you bring me, the weapons with the Durgeddon's mark on it, I'll pay you 500 GP over the, market value. Obviously not in those words, but, you give them that offer, and I think my group would be interested in that, but that would not motivate my party. They would need one of the other plot hooks or something that I would devise on my own. A plot hook that I could think of on my own would be that, okay, there's this forge. It's an ancient forge. Who knows what was made there? There could be all kinds of fantastic artifacts, what have you, magics that could be found. And then, I think my party in specific would be more interested in that than just the gold value. And then, of course, you could do both. You could just have them discover a map that leads to the place, and it could seem like an optional thing, rather than like the next thing in the module. Because, one problem with modules is that they're kind of, all aboard the railroad, here we go, choo-choo! And some people don't like that. Some people do like that. Again, knowing your players, picking the right campaign, that's what it comes down to. But as many foreshadowing things that you can put forward, the better. Because no matter how many you do, the players are just not going to remember some of them. What I like to do is when there's something that should be obvious, like for the characters, I will either just straight up remind the players if it's important enough, or I'll have them roll an intelligence check and not tell them why. And then depending on how obscure or how memorable what they're trying to remember was, I'll either make the DC a 10 or 15, unless it was just like a super obscure thing that they happened to see on the wall in a dungeon somewhere that meant nothing at the time, and they really had no reason to think that it would mean anything. And then maybe like DC 20 to be like, oh, that strange glyph on the wall, it was actually a map. We thought it was nothing, and it was. Oh my goodness. So there's that. But with Speaker and Dreams, there's unfortunately not a whole lot that I remember being able to come up with as far as foreshadowing. But one thing that is repeated throughout the Sunless Citadel is the presence of dragons. So again, in the Sunless Citadel, you could have them see dragons flying around off in the distance. In particular, I think it's either a black dragon or a green dragon in the Forge of Fury. I think it's a green dragon, but yeah, you could have them see it flying off in the distance, I think I had them make a spot check. I started the campaign, I didn't finish it, so I could actually link to my campaign journal. I did make a campaign journal for what we did. I will add that link in the description. So yeah, I think I had them make a spot check to see if they saw the dragon. I don't remember if they actually did or not. But I mean, every time that they pass through this long path to get to the Citadel, they can make that check just to see. And then, yeah, there's a cult in Speaker and Dreams, and they could have rumors about how this cult is doing stuff, and you can make it dramatic and ridiculous sounding, and the party could assume things about it, or they could ignore it. Either way, it's so far off at that point, and so remote, they're not going to know if it pertains to them or not. And that's a good thing. Like, you kind of want them to hear about stuff that seems far off, seems remote, seems like somebody else's problem, and then it can slowly creep up on them that maybe, okay, this is something important. Then moving on to the Standing Stone, like I said, it's likely that the Enclave is going to be destroyed. It's basically all the people are gone. But there's a lot to explain about that. But one thing that could be foreshadowed is just the ancient druid that I think he founded, or he won some battles there that were really important. Maybe he set up the grove. So that stuff could be, like, his name could be explained and what he did, because that actually becomes important again in the final module of the campaign. And any more foreshadowing for that could be a great thing, because it seems like something that is important enough that should have come up before the last module. One of the PCs is supposed to be a relative of this ancient druid, and I feel like the very final part of the module is maybe a little late for that to come out. It's hard to say. It kind of depends on the flow of the campaign, I suppose. But yeah, these are just some overarching ideas. Like, you see how a lot of it can be introduced early on. I let the ideas stew in the player's mind, and then you can provide more details later on that connect everything, rather than just being like, okay, you're at this dungeon, now you go to this town. Now you're told about this second dungeon, and you go to this second town, and then etc. Like, that's kind of how the module, or the Sunless Citadel campaign would play out if you don't find ways to connect them all. Another important thing for running a campaign of this size, because the longer running the campaign goes, the more levels you're covering, the more things you need to consider. So one thing to think about is, who are the PCs going to be fighting? Because you want to be upfront about that. You want to let your players know what it is they'll be doing. If you're going into a campaign with no undead at all, then you don't really want to have a couple clerics of Palor, focused on improved turning and stuff, because they're not going to use it. Or if you were to go into an undead heavy campaign, construct heavy campaign, ooze heavy campaign, like, you don't want a couple of rogues trying to sneak attack everything. It's going to be ineffectual. Sure, there are ways to do it anyway. That's not the point. The point is, like, know what your characters want and let them know what's coming, so that you can find a middle ground, find a way to make everybody effectual, give them all something to do at all times. And that's part of the challenge of the Sunless Citadel campaign, because there's no real overarching enemy. It's kind of a mix of everything. And on the one hand, that's good, because at any given time, everyone should be able to do something. So in Heart of Night Fangspire, all of a sudden, like, it's just almost all undead. It's not all, but, like, there's a lot of undead all of a sudden. And there's really not much undead throughout the campaign, so, if the party's not ready for undead, it could be a little jarring. But then on the other hand, it also doesn't really give a character like a ranger something to focus on, because he gets, favored enemies, and there's no one enemy type that's gonna be good throughout. I mean, dragons show up throughout, so you could mention that, and I did mention that. I was like, all right, dragons are a theme, but there's not much else. And then, it's tough for characters like the ranger, and there are some other classes that prefer to have one or two enemy types that they're up against. And some of that can be thought of as part of what links everything together. So if you wanted to, you could probably change up a number of enemies just to keep them all similar throughout. So in Standing Stone, instead of maybe elves in the forest, you could have that change to, who knows, maybe orcs are invading. There are orcs in Forge of Fury. You could make it orcs there. And then in Deep Horizon, you could have them show up again there, just to have it over and over and over again. There's you can change a lot of stuff. As DM, like, that's what I love. I love being DM. I like taking what's there and making it my own. So in the case of the Sunless Citadel, like I said, I had a ton of stuff planned. I think it depends, a lot of it depends on the party. And then the party's choices change over time by what the DM presents to them. So it's this great feedback circle, and that's part of what I love about having a long-term campaign is, like, I could plan everything out, and then after every session I change it a little bit because of whatever the party does, whatever they say they're going to do, whatever they're thinking about, they give me ideas, and then when in session I give them ideas, and it's when it works, it's great. So there are lots of classes. Obviously there's over 80 base classes and all of the prestige classes in the world, I know, but part of it, like I said, just know your characters and let them know the campaign. So if they know what's coming, then they can pick characters that'll be better suited for the campaign. So in the Sunless Citadel, pretty much any character will work. There are other campaigns where that might not be the case. So I also ran the world's largest dungeon, and it's just a dungeon. There's really no nature, so like druids are out, for example. Like, it wouldn't be the best thing to have a druid in the world's largest dungeon. You could do it, you could definitely do it, but I mean, they're not gonna have as much to do, as they're not gonna be able to use as much of their spells as they would like to. So it won't be as fun for them as a druid in a different campaign would be. And that's where it's nice to be upfront with the players, let them know what's coming, and then they can make better choices and have more fun. And that's what it's about. It's a game. Everybody should be having fun. I don't like the DM versus player mentality. It's very much a concerted effort to find the fun in the game with my group. In the current campaign, we are just going to start up the Shackled City. So we've been talking about characters and what's to come, and I've been explaining the kinds of things that are going to happen in that campaign, the kinds of enemies they'll be facing, and they're working on a party right now. So it's a lot of fun. I love character creation. Especially party creation, that's fun too with those dynamics. One thing that upsets me a little bit about party creation is when people don't choose exactly what they want because they want to not step on anybody's toes, and that's important, but I feel like you should always pick what you want and then together find a way to make it work, because any group can work. It might take a little bit to find it, but I feel like that's if that's a challenge, then that could be a lot of fun. Like a party with too many bards or something. It's very silly, but we were joking about that. But it could work eventually. There's a lot of different things that you could do, but for the Sunless Citadel, that is one of its strengths, is that pretty much any of the character classes could work in it. There's a little bit of everything, especially with just the core. If you're just looking at the core classes, it's easy to work all of those in. When I started running the campaign, I had 1 sword sage, a dread necromancer, I think it was a winter warden, which is a Dragon Magazine variant cleric, and a mystic ranger, which is a Dragon Magazine variant ranger. And I made some homebrew modifications for the mystic ranger, just to change it up, because it was only a 4-man party, so I wanted more arcane casting abilities than we had. And it was a pretty interesting group. They were able to handle the Sunless Citadel pretty well. I think going forward, they did not really have a rogue, so to speak, but they had some rogue-like abilities, like the Sword Sage can do some roguey things. But I mean, with a druid, a ranger, dread necromancer, they had their bases covered, so it worked out. But there's really nothing that would go wrong in this Sunless Citadel with that party, because they've kind of always got something to do, thanks to the generalness of the Sunless Citadel. So, like, a campaign like the World's Largest Dungeon, it's very much just a dungeon crawl. If you don't have combat abilities, then you're gonna be, you're gonna be stuck doing nothing, basically. Whereas, again, Sunless Citadel, something for everybody. There's some more NPC interaction sections, there's some dungeon crawl sections, a little bit of everything. One thing you need to do as DM when you're preparing for a campaign such as the Sunless Citadel, you need to read through every module completely before you start. Not only because you need to be able to create all that foreshadowing, which is really, really needed in the Sunless Citadel, but you need to know what's coming, you need to be prepared. And because Sunless Citadel in particular isn't as well connected as some others, you need to make those connections, give them directions before they have to ask you for directions, because you want to keep them engaged. So definitely read through it all first, so that you understand, like, okay, Blasingdale and Brindenford might be better to be combined as one larger city, so that they have a base of operations that they can always fall back to. Give them a home for NPCs to learn, to get to know, to hang out with, and just in general have some sense of connection to the story. Some perhaps danger, like threats could be made towards something that they care about. And that's something that the DM would want to know and come up with and create long in advance. You don't want to have to, retcon something out like, these 2 cities are actually one. Like, you don't want to have to do that. Like, you want that planned in advance so that it can just be this wonderful place that develops with everything else. Everything here I'm talking about is very general. It's kind of broad strokes advice, I know. I am going to break it down per module. I'm going to go over the Sunless Citadel and Forge of Fury, etc., and kind of give more specific advice on what to do in each module. But I kind of wanted to do an overview first of the campaign, maybe give some ideas of what to do with a campaign of this magnitude. I'm sure I didn't hit all the points I wanted to, but yeah, in general, you could take what I'm saying for any campaign, any 1 to 20 module campaign, and really, I mean, the advice stands for non-module campaigns too. If you're going to homebrew something and you planned on it being long-term, then you need to put more effort into it. If you're not just thinking like, okay, it's going to be like levels 1 to 6 or something, like, that can be a great campaign, don't get me wrong. It doesn't have to be long-term, but if you're only doing 1 to 6, then you can probably pretty much just start with the party knowing what the final villain is, and what they're working towards. There's, they don't need to know about some level 20 secret cult thing at level 1 if you're planning a long-term campaign. That would definitely be a secret that you want to unveil later on. So, the same advice stands for a homebrew campaign that's going to be long-term. You need to know in advance what's going to happen. You got to plan all that out, And that takes a lot when you're doing a long-term homebrew campaign. If you're doing that on your own, advice that I would give is read up on a whole lot of different modules. Find whatever you can, doesn't matter. There's tons of free stuff out there that's great. And just take what sounds good to you, take what you think is going to work for your party, pick and choose little tidbits from here, there, and everywhere, and make it your own. The more interested you as DM are in the campaign, the better, because that means you'll be more involved, you'll want more of a personal touch, and it'll come across much, much more to the players. They'll enjoy it more, and it'll be just a good time. A great example I have is when I ran the world's largest dungeon. I knew going into it that it doesn't have perhaps the best reputation, and I read some reviews on it, particularly one that was very negative, and I hunted down as much as I could that reviewer pointed out, and I changed stuff up. I changed up a lot in that campaign to make it more fluid, to give the players as much incentive to carry on as I could, and to keep it interesting. So one thing is that it is a dungeon crawl, and there's tons and tons of combat, just tons and tons of combat. So what I ended up doing was I ended up removing a lot of combat content, and replacing it with NPCs that they could talk to. And they could fight them, or they could not fight them. Like, not everybody is out to get them. That's a thing that I changed. Like, 99% of the things in that dungeon are just out to get the player. And by altering that that 1 to 100 ratio, it made it more interesting. Like, they could actually stop and think about what the next step is, what they're going to do. And I think that it increased the longevity of that campaign significantly. I don't know if we could have gone as far as we did. We didn't finish, but we got through, I don't know, half of the content. No, I think over half. Yeah, over half. And that is a massive, massive dungeon, massive complex. They got to level 13, so that's good. And that's just one example of, and I mean, that's a module too. So the advice stands. Definitely recommend the Sunless Citadel, and I will break it down more later.